Hello, and welcome back to the Wisdom Warhammer channel, and in today's video, I will be discussing the history of the Unification Wars on Terra. I will talk about how Terra became the nuclear wasteland that it is now, and then I will move on to the different kingdoms of the wasteland. I will go into details on them as well, and at the end of each kingdom, I will talk about how the Emperor conquered them. Like in my previous videos, I do not own the artwork in the video, and all things Warhammer are owned by Games Workshop and Black Library. So, with the intro out of the way, let's get the video started, shall we? Now, during the Age of Strife, the birth world of humanity went through a dark time as the government of the planet split into different warring nations that eventually destroyed the wildlife of the planet. This happened through massive battles to thermonuclear bombings, eventually creating the wasteland we know now, and from this, the technology and knowledge on Terra decayed as well. Instead of civilized countries that went to war, it was techno-barbarian war clans, religious cults, warlords, and insane monarchs. The armies of the remnants of humanity were horrifying, all cybernetic barbarians that went insane and slaughtered everything in their path, to the psychic priests and witches that used the power of the warp for dark means. From the slaver clans of North Africa to the rich hive cities of America, life was brutal, and to survive you had to be brutal, for it was a grim world. There was one empire that was beginning to form on this dark world, and it was in the land of the Himalaya, where the former Digilite order had its base. Now, the Emperor of Mankind ruled over this land, and he was going to bring every kingdom under his rule through the only way to, which was blood. The Emperor used the Thunder Warriors, who were psychopathic monsters whose only role was to kill other monsters for the Lord of Thunder. These warriors were mentally unstable and would often go off and butcher to their heart's content and would revel in combat and gore. He did use regular humans in the Imperial Army as soldiers on the front lines to artillery teams and vehicle crews. And as more Dark Age tech was found, he would create new weapons of war to conquer his birth planet. In battle, his war legions bore the banner of Unity, which had an eagle's head with 2 bolts of lightning. Of course, these wars of unification took more than a century to complete, but he kept pushing. As time went on, his Thunder Warriors each had a specialty in war. For example, the Iron Lords, who were great in siegecraft, just like the Iron Warriors Legion would be. In the closing decades of the Unification Wars, the Thunder Warriors were eliminated at the ancient mountain named Ararat, after eliminating the last of the more brutal techno-barbarian war tribes. But the remaining kingdoms were destroyed by the new Space Marine legions, and those territories would become the recruitment grounds for certain legions. Now let's go over the names of the techno-kingdoms of Terra and some of the lore that is available to us. The first of many kingdoms on Terra during the Age of Strife was the kingdom of Adigi, which was ruled by a council of techno-barbarians in the northern part of Africa. These pathetic clans were slaughtered by the Emperor of Mankind's legions of Thunder Warriors and Imperial Guard. The people from this kingdom, including the ruling families, then served as a serf class, mostly doing hard labor in the manufactura of the Emperor, creating more weapons of war for him. The next kingdom was one of the earlier campaigns, and it was named the Achaemenid Empire, and one of the easier ones because they surrendered their lands into the Emperor's kingdom. This kingdom was located where the ancient land of Iran, and with the threat of nuclear attacks and or a Thunder Warrior invasion, they surrendered. They were ruled by a monarch, but had separate clans that made up the populace. Also, due to them being one of the more peaceful parts of Terra, it served as a good area for recruits. Most of the recruits from the Empire would eventually become the Thousand Sons, and they used the emblems of Dul Karanian, their greatest king, to protect them. And the Thousand Sun sorcerer Isaac Araman and his twin brother were born in this pocket of land and were sons of the Achaemenid Empire. This culture was very superstitious and believed in the mystical arts of their ancestors, and I assume they had some psychers in the populace. After the Achaemenid Empire, we have the Kingdom of Akkad, which was conquered later in the Unification Wars and served as one of the earlier campaigns for the Dark Angels, which were named the Uncrowned Princes at the time. The First Legion was a new-born military group, so the Emperor led them so they can get used to combat and get an easy victory. This empire was led by the Great King of Aked, name unknown, and led his armies alongside his elite Adul, who were gene-enhanced slaves that had the strength of 10 men, and there were 200,000 versus 10,000 First Legionaries, led by Grandmaster Hector Thrain. The battle lasted 10 hours, and at the end of the conquest, the head of the Great King of Aked was hanging from the belt of Hector Thrain. Now this next kingdom offered more resistance to the Emperor and his armies, and it was named Albia. Albia was one of the more civilized techno-kingdoms, and they had clans that had extremely formidable warriors and technology/weapons that were forged and maintained by their iron priests. Their cities were soot blackened that were towering, and these cities produced weapons on an industrial scale. Albia also defeated the Emperor of Pan Pacific, and legends say that Albia held much of Terra before it became the kingdom it is now. When they went to war against the Emperor of Pan Pacific, their ironclad warriors fought the legions of warriors of the unspeakable king of Pan Pacific. Eventually, the forces of the Emperor went to fight the kingdom of Albia, but the Emperor's legions were being held back by the ironclad soldiers and their own proto-dreadnoughts, but the defenders were being grinded down after every battle. Seeing the determination of the Albion defenders, he called for negotiations and met with the clan lords dressed in white and crimson robes. After he told them his plan to reunite humanity on Terra and eventually bring them to the stars and to redemption. After he spoke to the leaders, and to the surprise of many people, the clan leaders of Albia accepted his terms and became his most zealous supporters of unification. When Albia became a piece of the Imperium, the Emperor began to look at the people for potential recruits for the legions. When he did find recruits, he saw the people in the industrial cities of Albia as good recruits for the Dusk Raiders, who would eventually become the Death Guard. He used the recruits from the Ironclad clans to fill the ranks of the Iron Hands before they were named the Iron Hands, and he used the people in the darkest part of the cities of Albia to fill the ranks of the Night Lords. So yeah, the Emperor hit the jackpot in technology, weapons, and recruits with Albia. But with the biggest gain, he was able to fill the ranks of the 14th Legion. After Albia, we have the small kingdom of Albion, which there isn't much lore on this kingdom, other than it was an easy conquest for the Emperor's Legion, and the ruler by the name of Ulium the Red was thrown into the vault, which was an imperial dungeon. The next techno-barbarian kingdom we have is Atlan, which was ruled by the Uruk Queen, who was killed by Custodes during a battle. Now, the next section of kingdoms, we'd have more information about them, and some of the wars against these kingdoms would be the first time the legions went to war. But continuing on the history of the remaining kingdoms of the Unification Wars, we have the Kingdom of Buitia. The government of Buitia knew the stories of the Emperor and held out against his armies for a long time, and refused any diplomatic meetings to avoid losing power. The ruling house of Yaseti ruled for 150 years, and then they planned to be integrated into the imperial government over time. That plan failed, because an invasion force of Imperial Guard alongside the Thousand Sons Legion to destroy the ruling house of Buitia. Buitia was also known for having a heavy concentration of industry, and also there was a buried ancient shrine to one of the gods from an earlier time in humanity's history. This next kingdom was Britannica, which was probably another name for Albia, so I will move on to the next one, which is called the ethnarchy of the Caucasus Wastes. Well, it was commonly known as the ethnarchy that had small territory in the Caucasus region of Terra, which was protected by force field generators and gene-enhanced warriors called Urish Karasi, and they had enslaved psychers as well as an entire stockpile of Dark Age of technology weapons. They were ruled by an oligarchy, and when the emperor sent his forces to bring them into his empire, they were pushed back after some time, and the casualties were 20,000 thunder warriors and over 1,000,000 guardsmen dead. When the emperor attempted again, he had several war groups of the new Adeptus Astartes and another 1,000,000 imperial guard, but he led this army this time. Before the main assault, the emperor sent the 18th Legion in to destroy the power field generators, and the reason he used the 18th was because they had armor that was able to camouflage them from the forces of the ethnarch. So they saluted the emperor and mounted Mechanicus machines and marched into the unknown. After some time, communications with the 18th were lost, and even the imperial psychers weren't able to locate or communicate with them. Days turned to weeks as the emperor awaited a signal from the 18th to send his forces to destroy this empire. And when the commanders of the imperial forces pressed the emperor, he said, "They shall not fail me. They will return from the fire, thus it shall ever be." Some reports say that after the emperor spoke, sudden massive tremors were felt around the region, and in the distance the power fields of the cities of Gorodak and the Jade Citadel of Hanghol fell. Seeing this, the emperor sent his remaining contingents of Adeptus Astartes and regiments of Imperial Guard and armor to destroy this ethnarch and his legions of Gene warriors. After he conquered them, he put the oligarchs and the last ethnarch into the vault prison, and the emperor took the dark weapons into his arsenal. The survivors of the 18th Legion were found after some excavating, but the Legion was greatly depleted, only having 1,000 legionaries remaining. Over in the techno-kingdom of Europa, which just had many techno-barbarian war clans and many empires that were crushed by the emperor's forces, but there was an empire that was called Europa, but it was in another part of Terra. Going into one of the kingdoms of Europa, it was called Frank, which was based in the western part of Europa, and this empire didn't take kindly to invaders like most techno-barbarians at the time. It was ruled by a man named Havluk Dagros, who was the last independent ruler of Frank, and in an act of rebellion, he killed the imperial governor and gathered an army of rebels that numbered at 50,000. But the problem with this group was that they were mostly unskilled militia, and at the Battle of Gadur, which was on a series of high hills by the ruins of an old bastion, the imperial forces consisted of less than 5,000 imperial guardsmen and the infant Dusk Raiders Legion. They slaughtered the rebels of Dagros. Near the kingdom of Frank, we have Germany, which we don't have much info on, but we know it was a small kingdom of techno-barbarians. Farther south of Europa, we have the kingdom of Gyptus, which is another small techno-barbarian state that we don't have much info on, but it was in the northeastern part of Africa. Now we have gotten to the Emperor of Mankind's kingdom on Terra, which was located in the Himalaya, which was the highest mountain range on Terra. Because this place was isolated, the ancient Sigillite order had its base, and this order was a group of extremely powerful people who did terrible things to remain hidden due to their technology that they held in their vaults. When Malkador the last of the Sigillites met the Emperor, he gave him access to the data vaults and weapon caches of his order. As the Emperor ruled there, he would order the expansion of the underground complexes of the Sigillite base, and it would eventually become the Imperial Dungeons. As time went on, he gained more technology, and he used the open space underground to create genetic laboratories and other areas for technological and scientific research. In the later parts of Unification Wars, the order was given out by the Emperor to start the building of the Imperial Palace, which would double as a city and a fortress. He used techniques of terraforming and atmospheric processors, which would allow humans to survive the high terrain normally, but this process would take years before the Imperial Palace was truly built. Now this next kingdom was halfway across Terra in the territory called Sudamerica, and it was called High Brazil. And this was the most powerful kingdom in the southern part of America. High Brazil was ruled by the tyrant named Dalmothkin and his family. They held out against the Emperor's forces for some time, but they did lose power. When the next leader was appointed, he was a descendant of the kin by the name of Ferom Shinchar, and he began to rule and wanted to be part of the Council of Terra. Thanks to Malkador's intervention and power, Sinchar was not allowed to join the council. Instead, he remained the leader of High Brazil. High Brazil was ruled from a place called the Palanto, which was a mass of different hive cities, and the government was stationed in the hive city of Sao Paulo, which was in the Palanto. The Palanto was powered by massive plasma reactors deep in the clusters of cities, and the heat exchange meant that a part of this place was covered in frost all year round. Also, the parliament building of the High Brazil government was located on the edge of the frozen part of the Palanto. The military force of High Brazil were the most disciplined and skilled in Sudamerica and were called the Dracos. These soldiers were allowed to be around even after the Emperor conquered High Brazil, and they were recruited from the desiccated forest of Sudamerica and often wore green uniforms, scaled cloaks, and reptilian helmets. When the Great Crusade was underway, the Dracos became the Curanti Drakes, which was one of the many imperial regiments that served along the Word-Bearers Legion. Continuing on with the history of the Unification Wars, I will start with the darkest of them all from what I have read. This empire was called the Mullins and Confederacy, and this was the kingdom that unwittingly served the Chaos Gods, and it was located in Nordic. These people were insane, but a different kind of insane than the regular techno-barbarians, and they used cannibalistic rituals and forbidden genetic manipulation. Thankfully, the Emperor led a massive force of Thunder Warriors and Imperial Guardians, the tyrant prophet of Mullins Descend, and his army of cannibalistic followers and chaos mages. He was either executed by the Emperor or Constantine Valdor after the Battle of the Red Forest, and this war was so brutal and haunting that Valdor himself felt uncomfortable and weary of talking about it. Going back to North America, we have the rich and advanced techno-kingdom of America, and they were as powerful and probably more powerful than High Brazil. This kingdom was extremely rich with ancient war caches that held a lot of Dark Age of technology weapons and armor, and whenever an army was about to invade them, they just paid them off so they wouldn't have to deal with the invading force, finding out that they have a massive stockpile of weapons. Moving back over to Africa, specifically the northern part of Africa, we have the North African conclaves, which was a rival against the techno-barbarian kingdom of Urish, and when they fought, both sides used the power of the warp, and I assumed both worshipped the dark gods of chaos. Oric is one of the more interesting kingdoms on Terra during the Unification Wars. It was built into a hollowed-out mountain in ancient Terra's icebound south. They survived most of the old night without too much trouble from the other kingdoms due to how far they were from others. Due to them being isolated from the savage war clans and priest kings, they thought that they were the chosen, blighted children of Terra, and from this, it became a religion as they worshipped ancient gods of old Terra. Realizing that diplomacy wouldn't work, the Emperor sent the Imperial Heralds who would eventually become the Word Bearers to deal with them. The first words that the commanders of the Legion said to the people of Oric was kneel and accept the Imperial truth or be destroyed. Even before the message reached the priest kings of Oric, they began to fire upon the Imperial transports on the ice plains. Seeing this aggressive answer, the heralds began their assault. Macro bombers dropped bombs on the mountain defenses and siege cannons pounded the sides of the mountain as Imperial heralds advanced to the gates. After 3 hours of fighting in the caves of the hollow mountain, the Imperial heralds forced the remaining populace of Oric into a small area, hurtling in the dark. The scared flock of Oricans wondered what their fate would be, and they found out. The Imperial heralds launched bombardments with the Ashen Circle at the head, and they burned everything to the ground. To finish up, they overloaded the geothermal power plants and flooded the hollow mountain with lava, which destroyed the ruined buildings, temples, and idols to the gods the Oricans worshipped. Word of the fall of the kingdom of Oric spread throughout ancient Terra, and the message of worshipping false gods would result in fire and ruin. Now, this next kingdom was named Oxitina, and this place was ruled by the monarch named King Gotha. They were eventually defeated by the Emperor's forces, but almost at the cost of the Ninth Lord's Ninth Company, and the remnants of the company served as Gotha's personal guard as a sign of imperial reconciliation. Also from this, Gotha became the first rogue trader militant because it was a better option than being executed. Circling back to a frequent enemy of Albia, we have the Pan Pacific Empire in East Asia. They were ruled by a person named Narthandum, who was the tyrant and the final ruler of this empire, and it is said that he was a half-mad and half-genius, and was considered the most infamous ruler who dominated on Terra. Originally, the people of the region had been under the rule of different techno-barbarian war clans that fought against the Indonesian bloc. Then a warlord by the name of Khazar united the territories, and they fought against the Brotherhood of Singularitism, who started to use the warp to empower their technology, as records say. Khazar led his forces into the Brotherhood's fortress and killed most of the cult's leaders, but one of their leaders named Moravec escaped to Mars. Sometime after the Pan-Pacific Empire was unified, the warlord named the Unspeakable King conquered the land and ruled it for some time. The Unspeakable King was overthrown by the clans of Albia, and this is how Narthandum became the ruler, but he didn't rule for long. When the forces of the Emperor arrived in the Pan-Pacific Empire, they fought a series of battles, and the Imperial forces destroyed the last stronghold of the Pan-Pacific Empire called Vhori. Doom was captured, but some in the Emperor's council wanted to put Doom in the prison known as the Vault, but with the urging of Valdor, he was executed, but many of his high-ranking lieutenants were thrown into this prison. Now, another event in the Unification Wars was when the Vhori city rebelled against the Imperium shortly after the Great Crusade started. The leaders of this rebel organization were the Crimson Walkers, a cabal of psychers, gene splicers, and warlords who served the last of the tyrants of Terra. These psychos wanted to bring Terra back into the dark times that it was in before the Emperor reunited the populace of Terra. So the Emperor was angry when this happened, and he said 4 words: "Send in the 8th." But the Legion would not be there right away, because they had to do other operations in the Sol system, as they number less than 500 legionaries. When they returned to the Terra, they planned their campaign of terror. First, they bombarded the city for 6 hours, which wiped out the lights in the city. Then they descended into the streets of the Vhori and started to slaughter any in their way. And when the Crimson Walkers sent in their forces, they didn't survive. But the Crimson Walkers thought they were safe, but the Night Lords already had Seeker squads stalking their targets. And then, when they were ordered to strike, they did, filling their foes with terror. To put the cherry on top, the 8th Legion placed massive charges around the city, which was on a cliff. And when the charges were placed, the Night Lords detonated them, pushing the city into the darkness with the screams of the populace being heard, and the battle was over before dawn came. The next kingdom was named the Sagerorn Enclave and surrendered quickly to the Emperor, but they did genetic experiments in the shadows behind the Emperor's back. When he found out what happened, he sent the Night Lords to slaughter every man, woman, and child in the Enclave to send a message to those who were thinking about doing things behind the Emperor's back. Now, the next 3 kingdoms will be explained quickly because there is not much lore on them. The Scadians were a very small kingdom of marauders who attacked other regions but mostly attacked Europa, and when they refused to bend the knee to the Emperor, they were slaughtered to a man. In the Ural Mountains were the Ural clans who flourished during the Age of Strife, and eventually the mountains would hold the forges where Ferrus Manus and Fulgrim would meet and compete in a forging contest. Now, this next kingdom was an important milestone of the Unification Wars because it was the last major military invasion that involved the Thunder Warriors. Its name was called Uratu, and this had the last major battle at Mount Ararat. The Thunder Warriors were under the command of the famed Thunder Warrior erratic Tyrannus known as the Lightning Bearer, who assaulted the stronghold. After long hours of battle, the Thunder Warriors had won the battle, but this was short-lived when the Adeptus Custodes, under the command of Constantine Valdor, slaughtered the entire army of Thunder Warriors. From this event started the next chapter in the Emperor's dream, and also the catalyst of the book Valdor, Birth of the Imperium. In the northern part of Terra lay a massive techno-barbarian kingdom called Urish, and they were the hardest empire to fight due to the number of genetic and cybernetic enhanced warriors that were the strongest the Emperor and his legions fought against. Even though it wasn't as technologically advanced as some other techno-kingdoms, for example, the forces of Urish invaded the southern kingdom of North Africa conclaves to get some of their advanced tech. This kingdom of raiders and techno-war clans was led by the warlord named Caligan. He was described as a cruel man who led massive armies of bloodthirsty warriors. He wore artificer armor called the Armor of Pearl, and the armor is a trophy in the Imperial Palace to this day. There were other high-ranking military leaders of Urish, for example Luotus, Senkal, and Qualadon, who led smaller armies of Urishian warriors. In the Chronicles of Urish, which offers a history on their rise and war against the conclaves, and also there was a record of Caligan, who used the power of the primordial gods and had very powerful psykers under his command. Hearing this, it is likely that the chaos gods were manipulating the warlord to do their bidding, but thankfully the Emperor and his forces destroyed Caligan and his dark empire. Most of the Urish forces were unaltered humans with some enhanced warriors, but a secret weapon was his psykers, who used the different powers of the warp. We do have information on the different units that Urish used in combat, starting off with the Roma. The Roma were a group of very skilled mercenaries that flew above their enemies and killed them with pinpoint bombardments and were valued by the generals of Urish. After the Roma, we have the Red Engines, who were the siege masters who used possessed siege engines and were under the command of Shenkal alongside the Tupolev Lancers. The Lancers were the close quarters berserkers and were ruthless and deadly in combat, which made them effective, and from these tactics the world leaders would adopt into their style of warfare. Now the last two known units of Urishian military are called the Wanacrides and the Wraith Singers, and with the first type of sorcerer, they served as counselors to Shenkal and served as oracles for the warlord. Now, the Wraith Singers are the battle mages of the Urish military and can kill a person with their spells and can bend the warp to their will. From learning this knowledge about Urish, we have confirmed that at least two massive kingdoms were under the influence of the Chaos Gods and were defeated by the Emperor and his forces. Now we have gotten to the last of the techno-kingdoms of Holy Terra, and it was named the Indonesian bloc, and this was located in what was formerly named Southeast Asia. The leader of this empire was named Cardinal Tang, known as the tyrannical ethnarch, and he ruled closer to the end of the Unification Wars. He was a man who wanted to devolve humanity back to the pre-technological age, so that meant he burned scientists, mathematicians, and philosophers, and anyone else who opposed his church views. He also forced the populace to breed with compatible pairs, creating a eugenics program to make it more effective, and any humans he saw as mutants and abominations were put into death camps and forced sterilizations. Eventually, Tang was overthrown by his people with the assistance of imperial forces, and he was thrown into the penal colony called Nusa Kambangan, and due to his reputation, he hid his identity. But this wouldn't last long, because he was found and ripped apart by the other inmates, ending this sick and twisted man. Soon after the last of the techno-war clans and mad priest kings were killed by imperial forces, the Unification Wars ended after a couple centuries of war. Millions dead on both sides, but the sacrifice was necessary. The Emperor had conquered the ancient birth world of humanity through blood, and he held the cradle of humanity with advancements in technology and science. Also, with the alliance with the forged world of Mars and the Mechanicus, the Imperium would soon spread the word of the imperial truth to the stars. But my fellow imperial scholars, I shall explain that story another day. Now we have gotten to the end of the video on the history and unification wars of Terra and a brief history of each of the major kingdoms and war clans that roamed the ancient world. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, hit the like button and share the video with someone who would like this kind of content. If you are new to the channel and would like to see more, hit the subscribe button and bell notification to be notified before another video comes out. I thank you guys for watching the video, and I hope you have a good day. This is Wisdom of Warhammer, signing off.